Okay, g'day guys, welcome to this episode of Aussie English. I'm sort of doing this one out and about today. I've got a different microphone on because I've just gotten back from the dentist. So I went to the dentist and had my teeth checked. Everything's all good. I'm currently getting meowed at by Peaches, my cat, because she's hungry. And it's sort of an impromptu episode because my editor is sick and unable to do the episode this week, I believe. So I'm going to go through and I've tried to find some questions from my AMAs, my Ask Me Anythings on Instagram, and I'm going to try and answer them for you now. Okay, so let me just try and find some new ones. Okay. Suggest TV series or movies for listening and speaking improvement. Man, all right. So Aussie ones, I imagine, but I'm sure you guys always hate me for this one. But my answer is always, obviously, if you're working on Australian English, try and find stuff that's obviously in Australian English. But really, at the end of the day, the most successful learners are going to be enjoying the content whilst also studying it, if that makes sense. So you need to find stuff that you are already interested in. If you can sit there and consume loads and loads and loads of whatever TV show it is, whether it's a documentary, a doco, whether it's, a sitcom, a drama, a thriller, whatever the genre is, whatever it's about, if it's enjoyable in and of itself already, right? If it's something that you would watch if it were in your native language anyway, or if you had subtitles in your native language or it was dubbed, that's going to be the stuff that's most effective because it's going to get you to spend the most time with it. And not only that, you'll be enjoying the time, right? It won't feel like a drag. It won't be really boring. It won't be a lot of work. But also, you need to be studying it actively, if that makes sense. If you want to improve as quickly as possible, it's one thing to consume a lot of content. There's that part of it, right? So if you want to level up your listening skills, then you obviously need to listen quite a bit. But you also have to be learning effectively whilst you're doing that work, right? That study, so that you can improve as quickly as possible. So in the case of listening, it would be reading and listening at the same time and repeating content many, many times to make sure that you are hearing every single bit of it and understanding every single bit of it before skipping over to, the next episode or the next movie, right? So I think, again, I need to look at the literature for this, but I imagine that if you were to spend 10 times, say you've got one piece of content that's an hour long, so a movie that's an hour long, I would hazard a guess at you getting more if you were to study that film, say, 10 times, watch the film 10 times, listen to it, take notes, repeat different parts of it, learn different phrases from it, different expressions. You're spending that time, 10 hours with a single hour of content, and you're repeating it multiple times. It's that idea of repetition, right? I would hazard a guess at the fact that would be more effective at improving your language skills than watching 10 different movies and not repeating any of them, if that makes sense. Obviously, there's the component of studying them that would be important in there too, because a lot of people, I think, they think it's enough to just expose themselves to content, to movies, to podcasts, to books, to conversations with other people, right? It's one thing to show up to the gym, but it's another thing to kind of know what you're trying to work on when you go to the gym, right? So if you are trying to get better at doing deadlifts at the gym, you need to know which muscles need to be worked on. You need to know the effective way in which to train the deadlift, the proper technique to do that thing. You're not going to get the same results just by going to the gym and sitting on a treadmill or doing bicep curls, even though arguably you are spending time at the gym, right, working on your fitness. But what you're doing isn't necessarily going to achieve the goal that you're trying to do. So my point is that, and I go off on a rant about this quite a bit, but I get asked this all the time. You need to be repeating the same content multiple times. You need to enjoy that content, and you also obviously need to be studying that content, spending as much time with it as possible, pulling out different words, different phrases, different expressions, focusing on the pronunciation. That could be one thing. So if you consume a series, make an effort to watch each episode multiple times. So you watch it the first time to get the exposure, you watch it a second time to try and pick out any new vocab. You watch it a third time and you say, okay, are there expressions that are being used here that I don't know, or that I don't know how to use? Or, maybe I've heard them, maybe I recognize them and I think, oh yeah, I kind of get it, but I don't. If someone were to tell me, give me an example of how you would use this word, this expression, this piece of grammar right now, I would say, I don't know, right? That's the stuff. That is where the edge of your knowledge is, obviously, and it's the next step to improving your skills. So I think with listening, right, a lot of the time when learning a language, you get to a point where you can kind of fill in the gaps, but you never really master 100% of what you're hearing in each conversation, because you can kind of intuit, you can kind of gather what someone's talking about. You can get by. The human brain is very good at that, right? Where we've evolved to be able to see patterns, put patterns together, and that is obviously true with language. So, and I find this to be the case with French and with Portuguese when I've learnt these languages to, basic fluency. My wife, for example, I'll have conversations with my wife all the time in Portuguese. She'll use certain phrases, certain expressions, certain words where I won't necessarily understand them in and of themselves, but based on the context of what we're talking about, the phrases she's using, I can kind of work it out. But then if I were to go away and you were to say, so my wife, your wife, Kel, she just used this word, how would you use that in a sentence? I would be like, I don't know how to spell it, don't know how to conjugate it, don't know how to use it, so, I'm sort of out of my depth. So that would be a key point for me to work on, if that makes sense. I would be like, I have to catch myself all the time kind of skipping over phrases and words that my wife says when we're speaking in Portuguese and saying, no, hold on a second. What word did you just use? What does it mean? How would you use it in this sense? Having those sorts of conversations with her so that when we are having chats, I can also be improving my Portuguese, because my Portuguese is stagnated. I've hit that plateau for a long time now because I'm not actively studying. And so I can get by, but because I'm not focused on, absorbing as much vocab and expressions and everything as possible, it's important for me to have these kinds of conversations when we're chatting so that hopefully I can absorb even a little bit, right? She'll use certain expressions and I'll be like, oh, that's cool. And then I'll remember it because we've had a chat about it. Anyway, so yeah, I guess the takeaway here is, and I will try and look up some TV shows to list you. I'll see if I can find some from this year. We'll see if we can find some TV shows from this year. But the basic takeaway is that find a TV show, a movie, a podcast episode or podcast, and then think about studying the material, not just exposing yourself to it a single time, as, say, relaxation, basic passive exposure, right? Where I'm just going to listen to this episode once in the background whilst I wash my, clothes or do the dishes. Obviously that helps to a degree, but that's kind of the base level that will get you improving your English. That is the very bottom of the potential that material has to help you improve your language skills. So yeah, I would be finding an episode of something, watch it, get exposed to it, repeat it, take notes with the new vocab, the new words, perhaps think about pronunciation that's being said, listen and repeat, use shadowing exercises with it, try and act out some of these scenes with people, find expressions to use, think about grammar that's being used, maybe informal grammar that's being used in conversations. Are people using elisions and ellipsis where they're removing words or parts of words from sentences when speaking quickly? Pay attention to connected speech. There's so much that you can get out of just a small piece of content if you apply that repetition idea. And so, yeah, find something you enjoy, repeat multiple times, think about grammar, new vocab, expressions, pronunciation, all those sorts of things, fluency, and then move on to the next piece of content. And I think you'll get ahead. And you don't have to do this every single time you're watching something or consuming something. But if you could do this for, half an hour a day, you're going to go much, much, much further in terms of improving your English skills than if you were to just keep chugging along, passively watching TV shows or movies or listening to podcasts and hoping that improves your English skills in and of itself, on its own, right? Really, there's no way around doing the work to be able to improve. And the good thing is that the more work you do, the quicker you're going to improve. And so you can kind of get some really good improvements. You can get those gains really quickly, but it requires the work. Anyway, all right, I'm going to try and find some Australian TV shows that we have here. I'll just list these out and you guys can obviously go and search them. So there's about a dozen here. Crazy Fun Park, Black Snow, Koala Man, Taskmaster Australia, We Interrupt This Broadcast, Dawn of the Dolphins, Alone Australia, Well Mania, Asking for It, NCIS Sydney, and The Artful Dodger. All of these apparently came out in the last year by the looks of it. So hopefully you can find all of those. Now, movie-wise, what did I watch recently? And I've just seen that these shows may not all be Australian shows, but hopefully most of them are. It says 2023 in Australian television, so hopefully they are. I watched a movie recently called Talk to Me, which was just crazy. It was kind of like a horror kind of psychological thriller film that I watched that was really... It was pretty crazy. So I definitely recommend checking out Talk to Me. Okay, the 10 Australian films to look out for in 2023. This is an article from The Guardian. And the films are Transfusion, Force of Nature, Hot Potato, The Story of the Wiggles. That'll be interesting. The Royal Hotel, Run Rabbit Run, Of an Age, The New Boy, Wizards, The Moo Guy, so that's Moogai, Shayda, that's Shayda, and that's the end of the list. So there you go. There's probably about a dozen TV shows that have come out this year in Australia and 10 movies. So go check those out. I hope you find some of them interesting. But yeah, just do a search on Google and see if you can find, these lists of Aussie TV shows. You can always get on IMDb and try and look at those lists of like the most popular TV shows and movies. They're probably a good place to start. But I think, my original point was try and find something that you would watch in your native language anyway, right? So if you're someone who's obsessed with comedies, try and find an Australian comedy. If you're someone who loves horror films, Talk to Me might be good. Try and find other Australian horror films. Try and find something that isn't just popular, but is something that you would enjoy anyway, okay? All right, how do we improve our pronunciation once we're fluent, but we still have an accent? This one comes from Tony. For me, I think the biggest thing is just listening and repeating, So there's layers to this, but the biggest thing is being conscious of your own pronunciation, comparing it to a target sort of accent that you're trying to achieve. So maybe try and find a role model or trying to think of the right word. Role model, I guess, will work. But try and find an Australian whose accent you really like and you think suits you, right? Like if you're a woman, trying to get the same accent as Crocodile Dundee is probably not going to be very helpful. You'll want to find, Isla Fisher or another Australian woman, to model your accent on, as opposed to a, elderly man. So try and find a good model. And then try and find them speaking. That's why famous people are great, right? Like, maybe if you're a 30-year-old guy, try and find interviews with Chris Hemsworth and do listening and repeating exercises with him while he's talking in these interviews. Pay attention to his pronunciation. Try and say the words that you hear him saying and then compare your pronunciation to his. How does it differ? That goes a long way. So that's good because you're constantly thinking about your own pronunciation, at least on a regular basis, right, to work on it. And so you'll start paying more attention to your accent and realizing the kind of areas that you need to work on, right? I think, a good example might be someone from France. And the stereotypical thing for French speakers is that they can't say the H's in English. They would say hospital instead of hospital. They have trouble with the TH sound. So instead of the, they'll say za, right? So obviously working out what kinds of pronunciation issues are common with whatever your native language is when speaking English with that accent, seeing if you've mastered those, and then trying to get as close to the native pronunciation as possible. The consonants tend to be pretty easy, I think, in terms of there's not really a great deal of diversity comparatively. There's not as much diversity with the pronunciation of consonants in, say, Australian English versus British English or American English. They sort of appear in different places. There may be R's pronounced in certain areas, etc. But if you can say a D in American English, it's pretty much the same in Australian English. The thing that I often say people need to focus on, especially if they're trying to develop an Australian accent, once they've mastered the consonants, it's usually the diphthong vowels. So vowel sounds broadly, but the diphthongs in particular. And the most crucial one would be O, right? That O diphthong. O, 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 like in the word no, go, throw, snow, O. If you can nail that, you will instantly stand out as sounding Australian. Even if you still mispronounce other sounds from time to time when speaking and you have an accent, I often hear people who they've been in Australia for a very long time, and nothing screams Australian accent more than when they nail that vowel sound, that single diphthong vowel sound, that O. If they can nail that, I will instantly be like, you've spent time in Australia, because it's such a unique part of our pronunciation, and I don't think it's found in any other English accents from other countries. It may be in Britain somewhere, but yeah, it is very, 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 very associated with Australian English pronunciation. So that's one of those sort of low-hanging fruit sounds that you could work on, the O sound. Obviously, I should, give you a shameless plug here. Check out my Australian pronunciation course. It has tutorials on all the different consonant sounds, all the different vowel sounds. It then has exercises, listen and repeat exercises, so that you can repeat these on a regular basis and master the pronunciation of each and every sound in Australian English. And then there are tongue twister exercises, and then there's a whole other section right at the end of the course for the advanced stuff like consonant clusters, linking sounds together, how sounds change when we're speaking with connected speech, all that sort of stuff. So I would go in, use that course, focus on the sounds in the second portion that go through the consonants and the vowels. Focus on the sounds that you're having trouble with. This is where you can get, say, a teacher. If you can find someone to give you a private lesson, even if it's a single private lesson, and they can tell you which sounds you're getting wrong. I remember I used to have lessons with quite a few Persians, Iranians, right, back in the day. And it would always be the WV sound. That would be something I would always be testing them on almost instantly. I would be like, how well can you differentiate when you're speaking between the words wine and vine, right? And, quite often they could master it and they were perfectly fine. They nailed it, but quite often it was a significant issue that they had to work on. Whereas for someone who's, from China, W and V sounds may be easy, and they actually have trouble with, THs or N sounds or, R and L sounds if they're Japanese, So yeah, focus on those sounds that are the most difficult for speakers of your native language, and go through the exercises and everything on those first and foremost. Get feedback from a native speaker, whether you're getting a lesson with someone or you have an Australian friend. Ask them which sounds you hear or they hear you mispronouncing on a regular basis, and then work on it. And it takes, weeks, months. You have to be working on this all the time. if you're consciously thinking about pronunciation, it's kind of like fitness, right? If you're consciously thinking about that all the time, you end up doing things like taking the stairs instead of getting the lift, going for a long walk to somewhere instead of driving your car. If you're thinking about pronunciation all the time, you're going to pay attention to the mistakes that you're making. You're going to catch yourself doing it, and you're going to then work on not doing it in the future. You're going to go and look for resources, people to copy, exercises to do, and you're going to do that work, and that's what's going to really help you improve your pronunciation and reduce your foreign accent as much as possible. And again, look, I know that that's not necessarily everyone's goal, but for a lot of people it is. You know, this is one of those things. I haven't really talked about this a lot on the podcast, but probably about, I don't know, 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago, there was a lot of shaming kind of going on, and a lot of arguments and a heated sort of debate and abuse in the English teaching sort of world online, especially the YouTube and you know, influencer podcaster kind of world. And there were those two kind of camps. There was the camp that was kind of like, you know, people want to develop a foreign accent with a certain, you know, say in this case, English accent. And then there would be, you know, and that's fine, and we should encourage that, and we should help people achieve that. And then there would be those who would be like, foreign accents shouldn't be shamed. You shouldn't try and get anyone to improve their pronunciation beyond kind of having a international basic English accent that can be sort of understood by everyone, because if you do, you're a racist, you know. And so I copped quite a lot from a few people, because I was obviously helping a lot of you guys trying to get your Australian accents. But the funny thing is, I never copped any abuse from people who were migrants who'd come to Australia and who were using my resources to try and learn Australian English, whether that was understanding or speaking it, everything like that. Because when you learn a foreign language, typically you want to have as good an accent as possible, not necessarily because you want to pretend to be from that country, but because you want to feel like you fit in and you want to be able to communicate as effectively as possible, right? And so that's my biggest sort of chip on my shoulder with this job at times. It's kind of like you can think you're being right and actually be doing more damage. And I think that's what a lot of these people did back in the day, where they were effectively encouraging people to just not worry about their pronunciation at all. And if anyone ever had trouble understanding them, it was because they were bigots and racists, and it's not your fault. And at the end of the day, you know, if you haven't mastered your English as best you can, you may miss out on a job opportunity. You may not find the love of your life. You may not make the friends that you want to make. You may not make the connections you want to make. So it's sort of very unhelpful, I think, that idea of putting the responsibility on understanding foreigners speaking your language on the native speakers or on other you know, English speakers, than putting it on you as the English learner. Or, you know, language learner, whatever the language is. That was my thing with Portuguese. I always worked my ass off to try and get good at pronunciation because, and regionally, I've got a sort of regional accent when I speak Portuguese, or at least that's my aim. It's to sound like where my wife is from in Brazil, because her family's from there, and I want to feel like I'm part of that culture when and if I go there in the future. And so I tried to develop her accent, use her slang words, everything like that, because it's important to me, not because I want to pretend like I'm Brazilian. But yeah, anyway, I'm probably preaching to the choir. I think you guys will understand. Pronunciation-wise, though, that's the basic takeaway. So I'll try and recap that. Find a model that you want to sound like. So someone you can model your pronunciation on. Try and work out what the common mistakes are for speakers of your native language when learning English, or more specifically when learning Australian English. Then try and find someone to tell you or give you feedback on what errors, mistakes you're making. You know, it's a good exercise, I think, if you can write down the issues that you think you're having, you know, which words you're mispronouncing, which parts of which words, which sounds, and then also ask someone else and see if those two things correlate. You know, are both of you saying, oh yeah, you know, this Persian person, he's having trouble with the W's and V's, and I also thought that, you know, so that's good. You'll get that feedback. Then find resources that you can use. Again, my Australian pronunciation course, I forgot to tell you where to get that. Go to the website aussieenglish.com.au/APC and you can get that course. You'll get instant access to it. You'll be able to access it everywhere. And then use the exercises in there. Go through the lessons. You can start from the very beginning and go through the entire course, but it's also kind of a library of content that you can use to just focus on your biggest issues when it comes to pronunciation. So you can just get in there and you'll have lifetime access to be able to work on your pronunciation, your specific issues, the TH, the V, the W sounds, all that sort of stuff. So then find resources that you can use to practice the sounds you're having trouble with and slowly chip away, slowly work on all the sounds you have trouble with. You know, maybe focus on a single one every week and rotate through them. And then keep getting feedback every month, every few months from other people asking about whether or not you're improving your pronunciation of those sounds that in the past you had trouble with, and realize that it's going to take time. It's going to take weeks, months, maybe years. It's probably an ongoing process. You just have to keep working at it. And don't give yourself a hard time, guys. You know, it's fine to have an accent. At the end of the day, your goal really should be to be able to communicate as clearly and effectively as possible, right? You want to be able to just communicate effortlessly so that there are no barriers, no matter the situation. If you're chatting to friends, if you're at work, at the end of the day, English is just a tool, and you just want to be able to use that tool as effectively as possible to do your job, to live your life, to have relationships, all of that sort of stuff. Whatever the accent is that you're going for, it doesn't matter, but that's the basic idea, right? You want your English to be as good as possible so that your life is as easy as it can be. All right, this one's gone for quite a while today. Sorry about that, guys. I keep slowly getting through. So this one comes from Shiravi, who says, I'll be migrating to Australia soon. What do you suggest? This is such an open-ended question. I don't know, what do I suggest? I mean, it depends. There's just so much to that, where to live, what to eat, how to make friends, what to do for work, where to study, what aspects do you want help with. I think I would probably suggest, my suggestions, okay, if I was thinking about giving someone advice who's saying, I want to come to Australia and I imagine you're trying to learn Australian English and sort of integrate into society as quickly as possible, what advice would I have for you? Obviously, it depends on so many different factors, but assuming you're, say, in your 20s, maybe 30s, and you are coming out here for either study or work, you need to find a place to live, everything like that, I would say come out here, try and find a share house if you're a younger person and you're single, right? If you don't have a family. Obviously, if you've got a family, try and find your own place. But if you don't have a family, assuming you're a single male or female coming out here to study or work, come out here and try and find a share house, so a house with other people where each person or group rents their own rooms. Try and find one in the biggest cities. I'd probably go for somewhere like Adelaide or Brisbane or Perth, maybe even Hobart. Canberra's okay, but pretty expensive. But places like Melbourne, Sydney, it's very expensive to live there, and there's probably fewer sort of, what would you say, opportunities or encouragement for migrants because there's a lot of migrants already there. So yeah, try out some of those other slightly smaller cities in Australia. Find a share house that has people in it who are hopefully all Australian, but really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much as long as they are all speaking English most of the time, right? Like my point here is that you don't want to move into, say, a share house where if you are Colombian, you're now living with 5 other Colombians. Again, it doesn't have to always be like that, but I would say if you're, again, this is what I would do if I was going to another country and trying to learn that language and integrate into that society and get a job and everything like that. The last thing I would do is move into a house with other Australians and develop a friendship network with other Australians in that country, at least in probably the first year or two. Assuming that your language skills aren't off the charts with English and you've got a lot of work to do, you want to work on your fluency, you want to, improve your grammar, everything like that, I would say move into a house where there are other people who speak English, hopefully Australians too, so that you get the added bonus of Australian accents, Australian culture, Australian history, Australian, news and current affairs, everything that Australians are going to be talking about if that's your goal. And yeah, you won't be able to hide from using English every single day. Because a side note, when I was living in Melbourne, I was giving private lessons. I think this would have been like 7 or 8 years ago to English learners. And I met one girl who was Colombian. She was the one that came to mind. And she was, I remember our first lesson, we went to, I think it was Brunetti's or whatever it is, the chocolate place, cafe place in QV in Melbourne. We sat down and I was like, okay, so tell me what your goals are, Where are you from? What language do you speak? What are your goals? What are the things you're having trouble with? I was trying to get a sort of idea of what she needed help with and how to go forward. And she was telling me, she was from a wealthy family in Colombia. She'd come out, they'd paid for her to have a room, they'd pay for her rent, they paid for her food, all of that sort of stuff. So she sort of had money, but she'd moved into a house with 5 other Colombians. And I was instantly like, what are you doing? That's probably the primary thing you would do if you didn't want to learn English. or if you went to any other country and you didn't want to learn the language, you'd move in with a bunch of your own countrymen. And then she told me that she'd gotten a job at a cafe that her housemates worked at. So I was just like, oh my God. So not only are you only speaking Spanish at home, but when you're at work, when you interact with your other colleagues at work, you're speaking Spanish too. And worse than that, I think she was saying she was working in the kitchen and so she didn't actually interact with customers or anything. And so she was speaking just Spanish effectively all day, every day, except for when she went to language school at night to study English for a few hours. And I was just like, the biggest things that we can change right now here would be to get you to move to another house and get you to get a different job somewhere else, right? And I know, at the end of the day, obviously you have to be able to do that without it affecting your mental health. You want to be able to have friends, and also financially, you need to have money. But if you have both of those things kind of covered already, or if you don't have a job yet and you don't have somewhere to live yet, you've just arrived in Australia, don't straight away go down that path of giving yourself a place to live with countrymen from your home country, or finding a job through people that speak your own language and who work there and with whom you will speak that language. You can do that later, I think, if you really, really, really want to. But, you just have to prioritize. And I think those initial 3, 6, 12, 24 months, the first few months, the first year, the first 2 years of you coming to Australia, if you can go hard and you can go all English, or at least the vast majority of the time you can spend in English, whether it's Australian English, whether you're speaking with Americans, Brits, people who speak English as a foreign language, it doesn't matter. But if your goal is ultimately to get your English as good as possible, in as short a period of time as possible, and as effortlessly as possible, it would be set your life up so that you are speaking it, you are surrounded by it, you are listening to it as much as possible, whether or not you can help it, right? So if you're living with other people who speak English only, there's no other option. If you're working with other people who only speak English or don't speak your native language, there's no other option. There's no way around having to use English for hours and hours and hours every single day, every single week, every single month. So if you can do that in the initial stages of getting to Australia, I think that pays off significantly. And through my own experiences meeting students and obviously running this podcast for getting close to a decade now, the students who did the best were quite often those who did that. They would come to Australia and they would go out of their way to set their lives up to be using as much English as possible every single day. And again, that doesn't mean you can't have friends who speak your native language. Clearly that's fine, but you just need to make sure that the balance is there. Don't set yourself up to only be geographically in Australia, but still just speaking your language, close to 100% of the time. Because learning a language, learning English, learning any other language isn't a kind of contact sport, right? It's not something that happens passively. You can't just be here and after 5 years you'll be fluent in English. You have to do the work. So yeah, anyway, I hope that doesn't sound like a lecture, but it was something that I was always very passionate about, sort of talking about and encouraging people to do. Go out of your comfort zone, move in with other people who don't speak your native language. And as a result of doing that, you'll make friends with people who don't speak your native language. You'll end up getting a job somewhere, hopefully with people who don't speak your native language, and you'll end up with really advanced English really quickly. And then you can start kind of being like, all right, now I want to dive back into my own culture. Now I'm really keen on getting some friends from Iran because I want to talk about those sorts of issues. They've got a shared understanding of my culture and my history. They like my food. We're all Persian. So, yeah, I don't know. I hope that's my advice. That is what I would suggest. Hopefully that helps, and hopefully that's kind of what you were after. But yeah, also just enjoy it. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't burn yourself out. Travel a bit. Try and meet people in, any area of life. Try and make friends everywhere. That's one of those things too. Don't think that you can only make friends if you're studying at school or if you've got work. Chat to people in the street, get to know people, go to different events, start hobbies, That's how you meet people. That's how you make friends with people. Find people with shared interests, wherever they're from, whatever they do. If you start jiu-jitsu or you start, I don't know, doing other sports, lawn bowls, join a running club, go fishing, and just don't be afraid to chat to people in the street. The last few friends that we've kind of made have been through our kids, where we've just had to kind of force it to happen by, interacting with other people at the park or through daycare and everything like that, and then going out of our way to be like, hey, let's catch up, let's do something with the kids. All right, I'm going to try and find one last one to answer because I think I've been going for about half an hour or so. Let's see if I can find one. Yeah, do you want to raise bilingual children? So this one comes from my Xin. Just going to have a drink because my voice is kind of going. Yeah, so absolutely. We've been trying to raise bilingual children this entire time. It's proved a lot more difficult than I expected. I think we did podcasts when Noah was born with my wife. So me and Kel, if you go back, you'll probably find them. But we were talking about exactly this, right? Trying to raise our kids speaking Portuguese. Kel's family lives in São Luís in Brazil, and none of them speak English fluently. So we want our kids to obviously be able to have relationships with these people, with their auntie and uncles, with their great aunts and great uncles, with their grandparents, everything like that. But in order to do so, they're going to have to learn Portuguese. Now, the trouble was we found as soon as we sent them to daycare, and I think in both cases, they started at daycare before they could talk, right? So before they had any kind of English fluency, and my daughter still doesn't really have, significant fluency, and she's 2.5. She can say little phrases and bits and pieces, but she's not there going, hey, Dad, how was your day? Are you all right, mate? In that exact accent. Whereas my son's a little, he probably wouldn't ask because he doesn't care, but he has more conversations with me. But daycare kind of screwed it up, and I wasn't kind of anticipating that. I should have, looking back, hindsight's 2020. But daycare and the fact that we socialize with effectively 95% other Australians or people who speak English, and so the kids outside of our house pretty much are only ever exposed to English. And so they both have kind of subconsciously just realized that's the default state and constantly use English. That is the language. Like, Noah will insert certain words, and my daughter too. Joey will also use words from time to time for certain things where she's, worked out, it's just easier for me to remember the Portuguese word for this than English. But by and large, it's been really interesting watching them develop linguistically because the grammar and the primary language that they use is all kind of built around English, which is the language that they're exposed to the majority of the time. If we never took them out and we only spoke Portuguese at home, it would be obviously the inverse. But I think it's because of that. They just think at the moment, their world is every single human I interact with speaks English. And they don't even know that English and Portuguese are distinct things, right? They just subconsciously know these words and phrases and this grammar is used by 100% of the people that we interact with. and there's maybe 5% or less that sometimes use these other words and phrases that mum and dad seem to use a lot at home. So at home, my wife and I are always speaking as much as we can, probably 90% of the time, in Portuguese to the kids. Sometimes you end up slipping back to English because, it is one of these really funny things. I thought it would be so easy to just stay in Portuguese all the time at home. But if you're just doing something and the kid, your kid comes up to you and just starts talking to you in English, your instant reaction isn't always reply in Portuguese. You have to kind of consciously be thinking all the time, oh my God, I have to divert back to Portuguese. Because if someone says, what are you doing? You're likely to reply in English, right? Oh, I'm doing this, as opposed to using another language to talk to them. So getting used to that has been really hard. And my wife's the worst offender here. She is constantly using English. I think she just gets into English mode because of work. She's at work all day. She's using English. She's on the phone. She's a receptionist. She's chatting to people constantly. That's a good job to get, by the way. Back to the previous question. If you want a really good job where you're using English all the time, work in admin. But it's a lot of work. Anyway, so she comes home and she's just in English mode constantly, and I have to constantly say to her, fala em português, cara. Like, Jesus. Fala em português. Speak in Portuguese. Speak in Portuguese, mate. What are you doing? It's been more difficult than I've thought. Trying to get my kids, I've noticed this with Noah in particular, he has no real Portuguese fluency. He knows little bits and pieces of phrases that he can string together. Eu quero uma bebida, I want a drink, right? Dada, quero assistir algo, I want to watch something. But he will quite often just insert English words. Quero assistir TV, I want to watch TV. Dada, eu quero a drink, I want a drink, right? So it is really interesting watching his brain kind of just work out the path of least resistance and to just use whatever phrases or words come to mind. I would love for them to both end up bilingual. At the moment, I think the best thing we can do is just to keep encouraging them to speak it as much as possible and to keep using the language at home and give them that exposure. And hopefully later they will start studying it more. Maybe we'll have to try and organize a tutor or doing exercises and activities at home. We get them to try and watch TV shows if they're going to watch TV, sometimes in Portuguese. Though again, it's kind of hard when, everything on your YouTube channel is in English because that's what you watch. But so that's the goal. It's just nowhere near as easy as I thought, especially when you're in a mixed relationship in terms of native languages. I think it would probably be easier if you're both from that country or both speak that native language. Because then, it's a lot easier for you. I feel, for me at least, with Portuguese, my Portuguese isn't at a level where I feel confident ever correcting my kids, besides obviously maybe the basics. But in terms of, trying to really hear the issues they're having with pronunciation or the advanced grammar stuff or whatever, like I need my wife to do that because she's a native speaker, right? Like I can kind of do bits and pieces, but really you need to be a native speaker. I feel, to do that with kids, at least to do it effectively and quickly. So that's where things currently stand. But I would love my kids to speak many languages. I'm also kind of interested to see what happens when they go to primary school and then high school, to see if they'll take languages there and which languages will be available, because I'm sort of an avid language learner. I think when and if they pick up languages at school, I'll have to try and compete with them and also get to a good level in whatever those languages are. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this episode of Pete's 2 Cents, guys. Don't forget, if you want the transcripts for all the podcast episodes except these, sign up to the premium podcast membership at aussieenglish.com.au/podcast. The Pete's 2 Cents episodes are just audio. They're the only ones on the podcast that are audio only. Every other one, more than 1,200 now, have transcripts. You'll also get access to the premium podcast player. There's bonus episodes. There's extra goss episodes. There's loads of stuff in there to help you improve your English. So go check it out. Besides that, I hope you guys have a ripper of a weekend, and I will see you next time. Catch ya.